Hey guys, tonight we time travel through barbed wire, telegrams, and the muddy whispers of World War I. You're walking down a cobbled street in Sarajevo. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, roasted chestnuts, and the low rumble of imperial politics. Your shoes click against stone just moments before history punches the world in the face. You probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, trench foot alone might get you before the bullets do. And we haven't even started the war yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time down in the comments. I read every single one, even the cryptic ones from 3 AM philosophers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hear a carriage wheel squeak, horses shuffle their hooves, and a small motor car glides awkwardly down the boulevard. Archduke Franz Ferdinand sits stiffly in the back seat. His mustache is aggressively symmetrical. His wife Sophie, elegant as always, offers a quiet smile to the gathering crowd. You don't notice Gavrilo Princip yet. He's a weary young man, 19 years old, standing in the shadows near a delicatessen. He's part of a ragtag group of idealists and would-be assassins. Their plot is messy, half-baked with cyanide pills that don't work and bombs that go off at the wrong time. But it doesn't matter, because somehow it still works. The gunshot that changes the world sounds small, like a firecracker swallowed by street noise, but you feel it. A jolt through the air, like static right before a thunderstorm. And just like that, you're in a reality suspended above chaos. The crowd screams, scatters, collides. Sophie collapses first. Franz groans, holding his neck. 2 lives gone, 17 million others to follow. And you blink slowly, realizing you're standing at the fault line of modern history. Scientists still argue whether the war was truly inevitable, or if just a few changed decisions, maybe a misturn or a jammed pistol, could have held back the tidal wave. But nations were hungry for pride, for colonies, for a fight to define themselves. All they needed was an excuse. The Austro-Hungarian Empire blames Serbia. Demands pile up like mismatched socks. Serbia flinches. Russia steps in. Germany postures. France flexes. Britain checks its calendar, sips tea, and starts reviewing its treaties. Like a domino chain constructed by over-caffeinated schoolboys, the entire continent lurches toward war. But hey, remember, it's 1914. Nobody's texting. Nobody's tweeting threats. Declarations of war are handwritten, sealed with wax, and delivered by mustached men on bicycles. It's all very polite, until it's not. You shift uneasily on your feet as military trains screech into motion. Wooden wheels, iron sparks, steam hissing like an angry kettle. Europe's railways become veins of fury, pumping soldiers to front lines that don't even exist yet. The romanticism dies early, somewhere between a stiff wool uniform and a pair of leaking boots. Here's a weird fact: many soldiers thought they'd be home by Christmas. Over by Christmas became a catchphrase so widely accepted that people canceled long-term plans. It's the war equivalent of saying, "This'll just take 5 minutes." Spoiler alert, it did not take 5 minutes. A mainstream scientific fact that slides into this: kinetic energy. When you fire a standard issue rifle, the bullet exits the muzzle at over 700 meters per second. That's enough force to punch through helmets, bones, and hope. Add artillery shells with blast radius the size of suburban lawns, and you've got yourself a cocktail of destruction the world has never quite metabolized. Now, while you soak all this in, a fun but under-discussed tidbit: Archduke Franz Ferdinand's license plate number was II 118, as in Armistice, November the 11th, 1918, the date the war ended. Creepy coincidence, or just the universe getting cheeky? Either way, you watch from a cafe bench as headlines explode. Newspapers flap open like startled birds. Austria declares war. Germany mobilizes. Britain joins conflict. And tucked between the lines, barely noticed, the lives of ordinary people unravel. You think of farmers trading plows for rifles, of school teachers turned map readers, of bakers forced to ration flour. You smell oil, coal smoke, and rising dread. And as you wander past a crowd gathered around a crackling radio, the kind with big knobs and deep wood grain, You hear the crackle of the future humming into focus. Not everyone's thrilled, of course. In the UK, a man named Bertrand Russell protests war publicly, risking arrest. Patriotism, he says, is the willingness to kill and be killed for trivial reasons. Scientists and scholars gather in dusty rooms, debating ethics, technology, and whether humanity's rational mind can survive its tribal heart. And still the trains roll. They bring men in from farms, factories, and families. Boots on ballast, rifles in hand, uncertainty tucked under every collar. You hop onto a crowded platform, pressed between sweating bodies and stiff collars. Some men whistle, some joke, one shivers despite the heat. All are headed for something far bigger than they've been told. You exult, breath catching on coal dust and irony. Here's the scientific kicker for tonight's section: emotional contagion. Studies show emotions, like yawns or laughter, can spread through groups via facial expressions and body language. So when fear takes hold in a train car, or excitement surges across a battalion, it ripples outward like a dropped stone in still water. In this war, emotional contagion fuels both bravery and mass panic. You clutch the rail as the train lurches forward. The sky is too blue. The clouds look too innocent. Somewhere, a general sharpens pencils and starts sketching the first real trenches. The wheels grind on. Somewhere down the line, you'll smell chlorine gas and taste iron in your teeth. But not yet. Not tonight. The train screeches to a halt, like metal screaming as it's torn apart. You step off onto the platform, somewhere in the rural haze of France, or maybe Belgium. Hard to say. Smoke drifts like lazy ghosts, just waiting to whisper your name. The ground is smeared with wet mud, and the heavy breath of boys who became soldiers overnight. You've never heard silence this heavy. Every footstep lands like a punch to the air. The wind slips over the fields but no longer sings, just mutters. In the distance, artillery rumbles, not like in the movies. There's no boom. It's a deep growl, like the earth itself is twisting from pain. They send you to the front line. A trench, narrow, soaked, and smelling like the bathroom of a broken world. To your left is a kid no older than 17, clutching an unsent letter. To your right, a man whose eyes seem to have seen every lifetime at once. You lean against the mud wall. An officer hands you a Lee Enfield rifle. It's cold, heavy, and far too real. You start to ask, when do we? But he just points forward, toward the fog so thick it could hide a crumbling universe. They call it no man's land, but it's full of things that used to be people. Shattered skulls, torn limbs, helmets buried with bones. You see the debris of patriotism ground into the gears of nationalism. And then it hits you. This isn't a parade. War is a lesson written in blood and read in silence. When the order comes, no one yells, charge, like in the films. Just a whistle, dry, hollow, the kind of sound that could wake you from a death dream. You climb the trench ladder, over the muddy rim, and run. Bullets hiss past your ears. One guy drops, then another. You don't stop, not because you're brave, but because if you stop, you're dead. And deep in your mind, a quiet voice whispers, I shouldn't be here. You dive behind a warped sheet of metal, gasping. Your heart bangs like a Victorian sewing machine. A bullet tears through the top of your helmet. Too close. Somewhere, someone's screaming for help, but you can't tell where. It's like the sky itself is shouting from every direction at once. And then the shell. It lands 10 meters away. You're flung backward. No sound now, just a ringing, like you've fallen underwater. Dust in your eyes. Your head slams against something hard. When you blink, the world tilts sideways. Your fingers trace your face. Blood, but still breathing. Not yet. A hand yanks you up. Another soldier. A stranger. No name. But his eyes say, we don't leave each other behind. You crawl back into the trench like an animal scurrying into its den. There, you lie. No words. No thoughts. Just breath and heartbeat. The only proof you're still human. Science calls this state combat shock, later known as PTSD. When overwhelmed, your brain shuts down emotional processing just to keep you alive. But trauma doesn't heal. It just waits. The next day, an officer gives a speech about strategic value, about maintaining morale. You look at him like he's a ghost in uniform. Words like strategy, sacrifice, glory, they don't mean anything anymore. Just trash floating on the surface of a flooded graveyard. You stop counting days. You only count how many times you didn't die. Then one day, you're pulled from the front, sent back for a week's rest, bath, hot meal, a newspaper. But you can't sleep. The shelling still thuds inside your skull like a metronome from hell. A cat darts across the road and your heart slams against your ribs like a sniper just took aim. A horse cart rattles and you duck instinctively. People ask, is it like they say? You smile tight, nod. But inside, you're screaming. They don't know anything. You start writing. Letters you never send. Journal entries you bury under dirt. You sketch faces you don't want to forget. The ones left behind. You don't believe in slogans anymore, but you believe in survival, in tiny kindnesses amid the madness. Like when a German soldier sang, "Silent Night," on Christmas Eve and the shooting paused. That's when you realized, the enemy is human too. One day in the woods, you find a tiny notebook, torn and damp. Last page says, handwritten, "If I don't come back, let the world know I once dreamed." You keep it, like a relic, a voice recording of the soul of humanity, trapped inside a machine gone mad. And then, November the 11th, 1918, the whistle blows, the guns stop. You don't cheer, you don't dance, you just sit, eyes on the sky, hands in the dirt, and your eyes begin to cry. Peace, but ragged peace, like a coat torn after a hurricane. They say the war is over, but inside you, it still echoes, like a song no one asked for. You go home, but no one's waiting. Your town is different, you are different. You walk past mirrors and don't recognize the man. And when you sleep, you still hear the whistle. The war ends, but the wounds remain, and the world still hasn't learned. You step off the train again, this time, in a world that calls itself post-war, but your boots still remember the mud. Your ears still twitch at distant thunder, even if it's just a summer storm, or a cartwheel on cobblestone. You walk past shops with patriotic bunting, but the air smells like something's rotting under the floorboards of peace. It's 1919. And the war is officially over. But in reality, it's just moved into the parlors, offices, and treaty halls. The old world is gasping for reinvention. You're in Paris now, wearing a jacket that doesn't quite fit, and a face that looks 20 years older than your age. Everyone's talking about the Treaty of Versailles, the so-called document to end all conflict. World leaders gather in glittering halls, shaking hands, puffing cigars, and carving up borders like meat at a butcher's table. You sit in a cafe near the Hotel de Crillon, watching the procession of diplomats and delegates. Their shoes are polished, their bellies full, their nerves untouched. A waiter drops a tray and flinches. So do you. Across the table, someone laughs about reparations. You wonder if they've ever seen a man bleed out through a sock. The treaty gets signed. Woodrow Wilson pushes his 14 points like a guy trying to sell hope door to door. But France wants vengeance. Britain wants balance. Germany gets blamed for everything. Scientists still argue whether this document was the blueprint for peace, or the fuse to the next explosion. You overhear a British officer mutter, "That'll show the Huns." He toasts the punishment clause, Article 231, the war guilt clause. The moment Germany is officially declared the villain, you sip your espresso and think, no one wins a war, some just lose slower. You wander the city, aimless. Your uniform's been folded into a trunk somewhere, but you still feel its weight. A woman bumps into you, apologizes. You nod, then realize you haven't spoken all day. The silence is becoming your native language. That night, you pass through the Place de la Concorde. The statues stare at you like witnesses. There's something about standing where kings were beheaded, then watching bureaucrats pretend they're gods. You lie in bed in your tiny, rented room, listening to the buzz of electricity in the wall, thinking it sounds a little like incoming fire. Science tells us the human brain rewires itself after trauma. The hippocampus shrinks. The amygdala goes haywire. That means memory gets fragmented. Emotions get dialed up or down unpredictably. You aren't just feeling weird. Your brain is rebuilding itself after catastrophe. You visit the medical ward out of curiosity. Soldiers with missing limbs joke about becoming pirates. One guy has glass eyes that don't quite match. Another has tremors so bad he can't hold a spoon. The nurse calls it shell shock. Some folks think it's cowardice. Others call it divine punishment. But deep down, you know it's just the cost of survival. You remember the man in your unit, who used to sing opera at dusk. He didn't make it, but now, in the quiet moments, his voice still echoes. Your mind has become a museum of ghosts, and no one buys tickets. In a narrow alley, you see a group of children playing war. Wooden guns. Bang bang. You're dead. They laugh and fall over. You want to shout, "Don't play with this fire." But what would be the point? They'll learn in their own time, or they won't. Some nights, you visit a library and thumb through newspapers. Everyone's theorizing. Books titled Why the War Happened, The Future of Europe, The Decline of Empires. You pick one up and read a passage about how alliances turned a regional conflict into a global inferno, like stacking dynamite, then acting surprised when someone lights a match. And just when you think peace might settle in, revolutions begin brewing. Russia is already lost to Bolsheviks. Italy's storming with black shirts. Germany simmers with resentment and strange new ideologies. The ink on the treaty isn't even dry before the next storm begins to gather. You read about hyperinflation in Berlin, how people carry wages in wheelbarrows and burn currency for warmth. And you wonder, how long until anger becomes a banner again? Meanwhile, back in France, a veteran is building a strange new invention, a prosthetic hand made from bicycle parts. It looks clunky, but it works. Fringe idea, some say, but necessity makes engineers of us all. A doctor tells you about a new method, talk therapy for war trauma. Not everyone believes in it yet. Some say the mind can't be mended like a bone. Others whisper, give it time. Scientists still argue whether these therapies help or just allow veterans to repackage the pain. You meet a nurse who says she's writing poetry. She reads you one about mud, and poppies, and memory. You don't cry, but your throat tightens like it's remembering something your conscious brain can't quite place. That's the thing about trauma. It isn't linear. It ambushes you like fog. Soft, quiet, consuming. By the time you leave Paris, the glamour has worn off. The treaty is just paper now. The real battle, the one inside people, is only beginning. And as you climb aboard the train heading west, you think, war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the silence doesn't hurt anymore. Which, for most people, takes longer than history books admit. The train lurches forward with a heavy sigh, like it knows the weight of what it's carrying. You lean against the window, watching France dissolve into a blur of fields and farmhouses. Each one probably lost a son, or a brother, or a reason to trust the future. You feel like you're traveling through a graveyard that's pretending to be a country. Your boots thud onto the wooden planks of a small Belgian station. The air smells of wet stone and roasted chicory. People nod politely, but their eyes still look out for uniforms, or for the absence of them. This is where neutrality once lived. Remember Belgium, the country everyone swore to protect? Yeah, that turned out great. You're here because someone mentioned the word Reconstruction. That magical term governments love to throw around when they mean, good luck fixing it yourselves. You walk through towns where bricks are stacked like Lego dreams. Half-rebuilt cathedrals stand beside craters, and families sell beetroot stew on corners just to make rent. War doesn't end. It just changes outfits. And while you're watching an old man repair a roof with metal scavenged from shell casings, the school teacher tells you something that sticks. We still hear the guns at night. Not metaphorically, literally. Apparently, out near Ypres, unexploded munitions still detonate now and then when the ground shifts, or some poor cow steps wrong. Scientists say soil memory, yes, that's a thing, can hold pressure changes for decades. The land itself is traumatized. You walk through what was once no man's land. Now it's farmland again, or trying to be. Turnips grow where trenches once crawled with rats. A farmer warns you not to step too far. The iron harvest, he calls it. Each spring, thousands of leftover shells and bullets rise to the surface like bad memories. He stacks them by the fence like firewood. One explodes just a mile away. It rattles your teeth. You blink. The farmer doesn't even flinch. Still dangerous, he shrugs. But the cabbage has to come up. You spend the night in a village inn, sharing a room with a window that rattles in the wind. The owner serves you black bread and cheese. Her husband lost both legs at the Marne, and now carves spoons with his teeth. Keeps him from thinking, she says, then smiles like it's a joke. You don't laugh. The next morning, you walk past a schoolyard where children recite the alphabet and sing. It's jarring. Their laughter sounds like someone tuning a broken radio, static, joyful, Ponting. You realize they're the first generation born after the war, and already, their textbooks are full of victory songs. You sit on a bench, write a letter you never send. You describe the mud, the noise, the way the ground shook even when it didn't. You draw a little map of where your best friend died, then fold it up and tuck it into your coat pocket like a secret. Science fact for the day. The average human ear can detect vibrations as small as 20 micropascals, basically the quietest sound we can hear. But during trench bombardments, sound levels reached over 160 decibels. That's louder than a jet engine. Your hearing never fully recovered. Sometimes, when it's too quiet, you still hear the whine of an incoming shell. It's phantom sound. The brain, like a loyal but slightly drunk dog, keeps trying to protect you even when the danger's gone. You visit an old church, now converted into a recovery home. Not for bodies, for minds. They call it the House of Rest. The walls are painted soft blue, the kind that's supposed to calm anxiety. Patients tend to gardens, feed rabbits, paint watercolors of places they'll probably never visit again. A man named Lucian shows you his masterpiece, a meadow with no trenches. He says it's where he hides in his dreams. Scientists still argue whether art therapy actually rewires neural pathways, or just gives the illusion of healing. But standing next to Lucian and his brushstroke piece, you're not sure it matters. Illusions can be oxygen. At dinner, someone makes a joke about Kaiser Wilhelm's mustache, and half the room chuckles like it's 1914 again. For a moment, the war slips off Evrion's shoulders. Not gone, just shifted to a different coat hook. Later, you pass a train yard full of rusting tanks. Some still wear camouflage paint like they're pretending to blend in. Kids climb them, playing King of the Hill. You wonder if they realize those machines once breathed fire, or maybe they do, and that's the fun. You meet a man who collects war relics. Not medals, not letters, actual shrapnel, helmets, boots. He shows you a mess tin with a bullet hole in it. The guy survived, he says. Carried this for luck until the next war got him. You blink. Next war. He grins without joy. Oh, it's coming. You can feel it in the air. And yeah, you can. At night, you lie awake in a creaky cot, staring at the ceiling where candlelight flickers like old gunfire. You try to sleep, but the bed's too soft. Isn't that strange? You spent years dreaming of comfort, and now your muscles miss the cold dirt. It's like your body forgot how to trust rest. Quirky tidbit. Some veterans sleep with boots on for years after they come home. Not because they expect battle, just because bare feet feel too vulnerable. There's even a name for it. Combat conditioning. It's not trauma, it's muscle memory. As you finally drift off, the wind howls through the shutter like a distant whistle. For a second, your heart skips. Then you remember where you are. You're safe. Kind of. You wake to the smell of boiled chicory again. It's bitter and earthy, like the world is trying to apologize through your nose. The innkeeper hands you a small thermos. Keeps the chill off, she says, and you pretend it helps. But the cold isn't in your bones. It's in your memories. Outside, fog clings low to the fields like it's afraid to let go. You walk past a row of wooden crosses, unmarked, weather-beaten. Their names forgotten but their presence undeniable. One is cracked right down the middle, and a bird has nested in the split. Nature moves on. You're not sure if that's beautiful or just deeply offensive. You keep heading west toward the coast. The roads improve, slightly. Every few miles there's a fresh monument, a plaque, a statue of some tired soldier staring into eternity. Most are chipped. A few have bullet marks, not from the war, but from bored locals decades later. Turns out peace can be just as trigger-happy. You reach a coastal village, where the wind always smells of salt and seaweed. The beach is quiet, and children build sandcastles with the same care their grandparents used to dig trenches. There's a rusted tank half buried in the dunes, now part of the landscape like an ugly sculpture that no one wants to move. You meet a fisherman who served at Gallipoli. He's missing 3 fingers and part of his left ear. The sea's quieter, he says, hauling in a net full of herring. You ask why he came back to fishing. He shrugs. Shells or storms, it's all chaos. At least here, I can eat what tries to kill me. Scientists still argue whether the trauma of combat is best healed by silence or storytelling. The fisherman tells you both work fine if you know when to use each. Then he offers you a herring, which is the most honest therapy session you've had in weeks. You sit on the dock, nibbling smoked fish while watching gulls argue in the sky. One of them dive bombs a crab and misses spectacularly. You chuckle, and for once it doesn't feel stolen, just earned. There's a small museum nearby, one of those local passion projects, where everything's labeled in fading pen ink, and half the artifacts are probably authentic. You wander past trench maps, bayonets, and a surprisingly intact pair of underpants labeled 1915. Definitely quirky, yes. A little cursed, also yes. One display catches your eye. Letters home. The handwriting is neat, shaky, full of hope. One line stands out. Tell little Mary, the first still carry her drawing in my helmet. You blink hard and move on. Later, you follow a footpath up a windswept cliff, where a weather station now stands. The man inside tracks barometric pressure, and reads cloud formations like fortunes. He says the wind up here never lies. According to him, there's a 72% correlation between certain wind patterns and soldiers reporting flashbacks. Science fact, wind direction does affect sound travel and pressure levels. Loud noise can seem louder depending on wind angle. Your brain knows this. Your nerves don't care. You lean against the railing and look out at the sea. Somewhere across the water, this all started. Somewhere beyond that, it might all happen again. You think about Franz Ferdinand, not the band, the Archduke, the guy whose assassination was supposed to be the first domino. Scientists still argue whether his death truly caused the war, or just gave it an excuse to show up on time. Either way, he got a lot more press than most of the people who actually died. You sit on a bench carved with names, all locals, all lost between 1914 and 1918. There's a blank space at the bottom, room for more. You wonder if it was left on purpose. A nervous kind of optimism, like the village didn't trust peace to stick around. Quirky tidbit of the day. During WWI, British soldiers used to collect lice from their uniforms and race them for entertainment. They even gave them names and made tiny race tracks. Boredom in the trenches was a force of nature, and lice were just available. You keep walking, your boots crunching against gravel and broken shells. A horse-drawn cart passes you slowly, the driver dozing in the saddle. You wave. He waves back like he's known you all his life. Everyone here shares the same tired expression, like they're all waiting for the sky to fall again. That night, you find shelter in a converted stable. It's been renovated just enough to make it charming without erasing the smell of hay and old leather. You sleep on a straw mattress with a wool blanket that smells like someone else's memories. And as the wind rattles the shutters, you dream of a world where things grow instead of explode. Science fact. Straw absorbs sound better than most modern insulation, which is why the room feels so quiet. Your ears relax, your jaw unclenches, your heartbeat, finally, slows down. In your dream, you're walking through a trench that turns into a garden. Roses grow from shell casings. Barbed wire curls into grapevines. Rats carry tiny watering cans. It's absurd, and yet, your brain is deeply committed to the aesthetic. When you wake, the light is soft. A chicken pecks at your boot like it's trying to pick a fight. You smile and toss it a crumb of old bread. It clucks in surprise, like you've committed an act of great nobility. Somewhere, you hope a historian is writing about this moment. Outside, you meet a young woman painting murals on barn walls. She uses charcoal from burned wood and paints scenes of peace, children laughing, fields in bloom, lovers dancing beneath trees. You ask her why. She says, because people forget fast. I want the walls to remember. You help her mix paint. Your hands, still calloused from the war, feel clumsy with something so gentle. But when you brush a line of sky onto the wall, it feels right. You don't even notice the tear until it lands on your wrist. You wake again with the faint echo of artillery in your ears, even though the nearest guns have long gone silent. It's as if your brain is stuck in a loop, replaying moments like a vintage record scratched just enough to be annoying, but not enough to stop. You rub your eyes, and the morning light spills over the hills, soft and gold, making everything look like a painting someone hurried to finish before bedtime. Today, you're drawn toward the remnants of a battlefield, now overgrown with wildflowers and tangled vines that almost hide the scars beneath. You step carefully over the cracked earth, where trenches once twisted like giant, angry worms beneath your feet. There's a scent in the air, something like damp earth mixed with forgotten memories. You breathe it in. It's strangely comforting, the way nostalgia sometimes is. Even when it's about something so grim, you notice the silence here isn't really silence. It's filled with a low hum of insects, the occasional bird call, and the distant lap of a stream. It's easy to forget that this was once a place of chaos, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of soldiers' voices, orders barked, and the eerie whistle of shells flying past. Scientists still argue whether the human brain processes trauma better by confronting these haunting places, or by avoiding them altogether. You're somewhere in between, feeling the weight of history without letting it crush you. You find a rusty helmet half buried in the soil and pick it up, turning it over in your hands. It's cold and rough, the metal chipped and scarred, but it carries a story you'll never fully know. A quirky fact floats through your mind. During WWI, pigeons were the unsung heroes, delivering messages across enemy lines. One pigeon, named Cher Ami, saved nearly 200 soldiers by carrying a critical message, despite being shot through the chest. You smile, imagining a tiny bird with a feathered helmet, flying with heroic determination. The war was full of such strange contrasts, horrific destruction mixed with moments of unexpected courage and even humor. Nearby, a wooden sign points to a nearby village that was once a bustling hub for soldiers. You wander through its narrow streets, imagining the soldiers slipping in and out of dimly lit taverns, their faces worn but their spirits clinging to jokes and whispered hopes. The local bakery still uses the same ovens, and the smell of fresh bread momentarily transports you away from the heavy past. You come across a small memorial garden, where poppies bloom in wild abundance, their bright red petals a stark contrast to the muted colors around. The poppy became a symbol of remembrance after the war, inspired by a poem that captured the resilience of these fragile flowers growing through the devastated battlefields. You kneel to touch one, its delicate petals soft against your fingers. There's something almost magical in how life pushes through even the darkest soil. As the afternoon sun warms your skin, you stumble upon an old war diary, left behind or lost, its pages yellowed and fragile. You read a passage about a soldier's dream of home, a warm fire, a mother's voice, the taste of fresh fruit. The words are simple but soaked in longing. You wonder if that soldier ever made it back, or if those dreams were all he carried in the end. Scientists still argue whether reading personal stories like these helps us understand the true cost of war or if it traps us in a cycle of sorrow that's hard to escape. Maybe it's both. You tuck the diary into your bag, a small treasure to carry with you. That evening, you find yourself back near the coastline, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon. The waves whisper secrets you can't quite catch, and the sky blazes with oranges and pinks. A flock of birds spirals overhead, their flight patterns almost like a dance, a reminder that life goes on, despite everything. You sit on a weathered bench, the wood warm from the sun, and close your eyes. You imagine the thousands of soldiers who once sat here, their faces etched with exhaustion and hope, sharing stories to keep the darkness at bay. You breathe deeply, feeling a sense of connection across time. A scientific fact floats to the surface of your mind. Exposure to natural environments like this can reduce stress and improve mental health, something modern soldiers often use in recovery. Maybe the earth itself holds a gentle kind of healing power, if you're willing to listen. You lean back, letting the gentle breeze carry away the tension you didn't realize you were holding. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolls softly, marking time like a heartbeat. And as the light fades, you find yourself drifting into a quiet peace, the echoes of war softened by the calm night. The dawn comes quietly, wrapped in mist that clings to the fields like a whispered secret. You wander through rows of simple white crosses standing silently in neat formation, their smooth marble faces cool under your fingertips. This is a cemetery, but not just any cemetery. It's a resting place for thousands who gave everything in a conflict that reshaped the world. You feel the weight of so many stories pressing gently against the air, each grave a whisper from the past. You notice how the names carved on the stones range from the very young to the older men, some with just initials, others with full names and heartfelt epitaphs. It's strange, the way death can make strangers feel close, as if their bravery and sacrifice echo through time and space to touch you right now. You kneel to pick a small wildflower, growing near one of the graves, a delicate blue blossom that seems almost defiant amid the quiet solemnity. Scientists still argue whether collective mourning through monuments and cemeteries actually helps communities heal, or if it risks trapping grief in a permanent shadow. You're not sure which side you lean toward, but standing here, you can almost feel the tension between remembrance and release. It's a delicate balance, like holding your breath underwater. Too much of either can suffocate you. As you walk along, you hear a faint rustling behind a nearby hedge. Out hops a curious rabbit, its nose twitching as it surveys you like a tiny general inspecting his troops. You chuckle softly, imagining this fluffy creature as the war's most unexpected survivor, hopping through trenches and avoiding gunfire with unshakable luck. During World War I, soldiers often found solace in small moments like these, watching wildlife, or trading jokes to hold back despair. You brush off the image and focus on a small information plaque nearby. It describes how, despite the horror, soldiers sometimes released carrier pigeons to carry messages of hope, or wrote letters home that could never quite express the surreal reality they lived. These communication methods, primitive yet vital, remind you of how technology has always danced hand in hand with warfare, evolving rapidly under pressure. Speaking of technology, the machine gun, scientifically speaking, revolutionized combat during the war. Its rapid-fire capability created a deadly stalemate, turning open fields into killing zones, and trenches into grim fortresses. You can almost hear the rhythmic rat-a-tat-tat echoing through the past, a mechanical heartbeat of relentless danger. It's chilling to think how science intended for progress can so quickly become an instrument of destruction. On a lighter note, here's a quirky tidbit. Some soldiers used to carry small, trench art pieces, items crafted from shell casings or scraps of metal, to pass the time and keep their spirits up. One even fashioned a tiny accordion from discarded parts, playing it softly beneath the mud. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, creativity flickers stubbornly alive. You pause at a large oak tree standing sentinel over the graves, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. It's been here since before the war, a silent witness to generations of change. You press your palm against its bark, feeling the rough texture and steady heartbeat of life beneath. Trees like this are nature's own monuments, enduring beyond human conflict. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows and bathing the scene in warm light. You take a deep breath, tasting the fresh air mixed with faint traces of pine and earth. Your mind drifts to the open question many historians debate. Did the brutal trench warfare break the spirit of the soldiers, or did it forge an unbreakable bond among them? It's a question with no easy answer, much like the tangled roots beneath your feet. As the afternoon draws near, you find yourself near an old chapel built to honor the fallen. Its stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the stone floor, flickering like ghostly flames. Inside, silence reigns, save for the soft creak of wooden pews, and the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof. You sit quietly, letting the peaceful stillness wash over you. You pull a small piece of chocolate from your pocket, a soldier's small luxury in the trenches, and savor its bittersweet richness. The science behind chocolate's effect on mood is well known. It releases endorphins and serotonin, offering a brief escape from pain. You wonder if those long-ago soldiers found similar comfort in such tiny indulgences amid hardship. As the chapel clock chimes softly, you rise and step outside, greeted by the warm breeze carrying distant laughter and the scent of blooming jasmine. You realize that despite all the sorrow, hope and life persist stubbornly here, entwined with the memories of sacrifice. You take one last look at the peaceful scene before turning away, feeling the slow rhythm of history seep into your bones. The past is never far, and as you walk onward, you carry its lessons quietly with you. You find yourself back among the sprawling fields, the grass swaying gently in the breeze as if whispering secrets only the wind can carry. The air is cooler here, a mix of damp earth and faint traces of smoke long since faded. As you walk, you can almost hear the distant echoes of artillery, the dull rumble and occasional sharp crack, though you know those sounds belong to history, a ghostly soundtrack playing just beyond your reach. One of the most iconic images from this time is the sight of the trenches themselves, those long, muddy scars carved into the landscape. You trudge along the narrow wooden walkways, the mud squelching softly beneath your boots. The smell is a peculiar blend of damp wood, sweat, and the ever-present scent of earth turned over and over. It's the smell of endurance, survival, and a very stubborn refusal to give up. Scientists still argue whether the psychological impact of trench warfare created lasting trauma that shaped modern understandings of PTSD, or if the shared hardship somehow fostered a unique camaraderie that helped many soldiers cope. The debate lingers like the fog over these fields, unresolved, complex, and deeply human. You pause to peer over the edge of a trench. Below, the labyrinthine network stretches for miles, zigzagging like a restless serpent beneath the ground. It's hard to imagine the claustrophobic darkness soldiers endured, where mud, rats, and fear were constant companions. Speaking of rats, here's a quirky fact. Some trenches were infested with rats so large they earned nicknames like trench wolves, reputedly bold enough to steal food right from a soldier's hand. It's a slightly absurd, yet grim reminder that life finds a way, even in the worst conditions. The trench wasn't just a ditch, it was a whole ecosystem of survival. Soldiers used duckboards, wooden planks laid on the bottom, to avoid sinking into the mud, which could swallow a man whole. You imagine the frustration of balancing on those slippery boards during a thunderous bombardment, the sound of shells exploding around you like giant firecrackers gone terribly wrong. Your mind wanders to the strange, almost mechanical dance of war technology here. Poison gas, introduced on a massive scale during this conflict, was a terrifying new weapon. The chemical reactions it triggered in the lungs were horrifying, and soldiers had to improvise gas masks from everything from cotton pads to urine-soaked cloth. Yes, urine. The chemical reaction between ammonia in urine and chlorine gas could somewhat neutralize the poison, a grim but fascinating example of battlefield improvisation. And yet, amid these horrors, there were moments of surreal normalcy. You recall stories of Christmas truces, where soldiers from opposing sides emerged cautiously from their trenches, exchanging greetings, food, and even games of soccer. It's a strange, almost unbelievable image of peace blooming briefly in a garden of war. Scientifically, the development of barbed wire and machine guns created a defensive stalemate that made advances slow and costly. The battlefield became a graveyard of repeated attempts, with each side digging in deeper, turning the land into a frozen tableau of struggle. You can almost feel the weight of futility pressing down, heavy as the steel helmets worn by those who fought. As you continue your walk, you spot a small, battered helmet lying half buried in the mud, a silent reminder of someone who passed through here long ago. It's almost poetic, this forgotten piece of metal, once so vital, now just another relic swallowed by the earth. You reach a shallow shell crater filled with rainwater, its surface reflecting the muted gray sky. It feels like a mirror into the past, inviting you to peer deeper into the stories beneath the surface. The water ripples gently, disturbed by a small breeze, carrying the scent of wet stone and fresh grass. Light fades slowly now, and you hear the faint call of an owl somewhere in the distance, a nocturnal observer indifferent to human conflicts. It's a peaceful contrast to the chaos once wrought here, and you take a moment to breathe it in, feeling your body relax as night settles gently over the landscape. Before moving on, here's one last bit of trivia for the day. Soldiers sometimes wore pocket sundials, small, portable devices to tell time in the trenches. A mix of practicality and curiosity, these tiny tools helped men keep track of the endless hours. As days blurred into one another, you keep walking, the ground soft beneath your feet, carrying these fragments of history as you go, each step a quiet tribute to resilience. You wander now into the tangled aftermath of battlefields, where the earth itself seems to remember the violence it has borne. The ground is scarred with countless craters, a pockmarked landscape that feels almost lunar under the soft glow of the setting sun. It's hard not to imagine the thunderous explosions that carved these holes, each one a sudden, violent upheaval of soil and rock, sending shockwaves rippling through both land and soul. One scientific fact that sticks with you here is the sheer energy released by artillery shells, some equal to thousands of pounds of TNT. When one of these detonated nearby, it was as if the ground briefly became a living thing, heaving and groaning under the blast. The power of modern explosives changed warfare forever, turning fields into deadly mazes and sending shockwaves that could rupture eardrums and minds alike. Scientists still argue whether the sheer scale of bombardment during World War I was a cause of widespread shell shock, or if the term masked a more complex set of psychological and physical traumas. The debate around shell shock eventually shaped modern understanding of combat stress disorders. But back then, many soldiers faced stigma and misunderstanding, often branded as cowards for something beyond their control. You feel a strange chill as you imagine the soldiers' ears ringing, their bodies trembling, caught in that invisible blast wave that could leave no visible wounds but cause profound damage inside. One soldier, you recall, described it as being hit by a thunderclap that stays inside your head. It's hard to overstate how new and terrifying this kind of warfare was for the men who fought it. Some troops carried pocket-sized compasses and maps, but the landscape was constantly shifting, sometimes literally swallowed by explosions or heavy rain turning trenches into rivers. Mud became an omnipresent enemy, as much as any human adversary. The mud could stick like glue, pulling boots down and turning the simplest steps into exhausting efforts. Quirky fact alert: certain soldiers became unofficial mud men, covered head to toe in the sticky, gray stuff, sometimes even carrying small shovels to dig themselves out. In some cases, mud preserved lost items for decades, as if the battlefield was trying to hold on to its secrets tightly. And then there were the animals, those unsung companions in the trenches and no man's land. Horses, dogs, and even carrier pigeons played vital roles in communication and supply. Pigeons especially, those feathered little heroes, could fly through hazardous zones to deliver messages when all else failed. Their uncanny homing ability has fascinated scientists for centuries, with some even studying their brain structures to understand navigation. The role of pigeons in the war remains a fascinating, if somewhat overlooked, part of history. You imagine a soldier releasing a pigeon from the muddy trench, watching it disappear into the gray sky, carrying hope and information to far-off commanders. It's a small but poignant reminder of how even in the darkest times, ingenuity and life persist. As night creeps closer, the quiet hum of insects begins to rise, a soft, natural white noise contrasting sharply with the memories of thunderous blasts. The world feels suspended between chaos and calm, and you can almost hear the distant whistle of a passing train, a symbol of industry and change. Before you move on, here's a light-hearted moment. Some soldiers kept small, war gardens near their posts, growing vegetables like carrots or radishes. It was a tiny rebellion against the bleakness, a way to remind themselves that life could still sprout amid destruction. You take a deep breath of the cool evening air, letting the scent of wet earth and fresh grass fill your lungs. The battlefield, though silent now, still speaks in echoes, the stories of those who endured, fought, and sometimes simply survived. You step deeper into the tangled web of alliances and secret treaties that shaped the early days of the war, an invisible battlefield of diplomacy and whispered conversations that carried the weight of entire nations. The map sprawls before you, like a complex puzzle, with countries linked by promises and threats that could ignite or douse flames of conflict. You can almost hear the rustle of papers and the hushed voices of diplomats, trading favors in shadowed rooms, far removed from the muddy trenches and deafening artillery. One mainstream scientific fact that stands out here is the psychological concept of groupthink, where decision-makers, eager to maintain harmony, suppress doubts and dissent, sometimes leading to catastrophic choices. It's a fitting lens through which to view the tangled alliances of pre-war Europe. Leaders, convinced of their own infallibility and caught in this echo chamber, marched their countries toward war with a collective blind spot. Scientists still argue whether the intricate system of alliances was more a deterrent or a tinderbox, as some historians suggest it paradoxically made a large-scale war almost inevitable. Was the network of treaties designed to keep peace, or did it instead create a domino effect once the first piece fell? You ponder how a single assassination, the spark that lit the powder keg, could cascade into a global conflict. You imagine yourself as a spy, slipping between embassies, gathering scraps of information that might hint at the next move. The cloak and dagger atmosphere feels almost surreal, like a spy novel come to life, except the stakes were terrifyingly real. Secret codes, encrypted messages, and double agents added layers of mystery and tension, with intelligence services expanding rapidly as war became a test not just of guns and trenches but of minds and wits. Amidst this serious backdrop, there's a quirky tidbit. Some spies used carrier pigeons fitted with tiny cameras to gather reconnaissance photos, a precursor to modern drone technology. The idea of a bird flying over enemy lines snapping pictures is oddly charming but effective. As night falls, you can almost hear the ticking of clocks, symbolizing how time itself became a weapon and a prisoner in this war. Battles were timed to the minute, plans executed with military precision, yet the war's duration shattered everyone's expectations. Early predictions of a quick victory crumbled under the weight of grinding trench warfare. You picture a weary general staring at maps by candlelight, calculating odds and praying that the next move won't be the one that breaks the fragile morale of his troops. Behind every strategic decision lies the shadow of countless lives, and the burden weighs heavy. A little humor sneaks in. Some generals were notorious for their love of cigars, even in the mud and chaos. Imagine puffing away while dodging shellfire, an oddly calming ritual in a world gone mad. You sense the complexity of this tangled diplomatic web, and how it forever altered the nature of war, not just fought with weapons but also with alliances, secrets, and psychological games. You trudge onward through the endless mire of trench warfare, a landscape so bleak it almost feels alive, mud swallowing boots, barbed wire snagging everything, and the distant thunder of artillery rolling like a relentless storm. You taste the metallic tang of damp earth mixed with sweat and fear. The trenches stretch like scars across the land, a labyrinth where millions of men huddle, waiting, surviving, sometimes dying without a sound. One mainstream scientific fact here is the human body's remarkable capacity to endure extreme stress and hardship. Soldiers in the trenches often face sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and cold, yet many found ways to adapt physically and mentally, sometimes even forming tight-knit communities that offered fleeting solace. Scientists still argue whether the static nature of trench warfare was a result of outdated tactics or an unavoidable response to new technology. The introduction of machine guns and artillery made traditional charges suicidal, forcing armies into a deadly stalemate. But some historians believe commanders could have innovated faster. You imagine the daily grind of trench life, the endless waiting punctuated by brief, horrifying bursts of combat. Rats scuttle past, unbothered by the destruction, growing fat on scraps and worse. Soldiers joke that the rats were bigger than cats, and some even named them as companions, a grim way to hold on to sanity. You can almost hear the muffled laughter mixed with groans, an eerie soundtrack to this limbo between life and death. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some soldiers carried portable gramophones, playing jazz and swing music to boost morale amid the mud and misery. The surreal contrast of upbeat tunes against the backdrop of war is almost comical, music as a lifeline. You envision the innovation that arose from necessity. Periscopes to peek over trenches, tunnels dug beneath enemy lines, and gas masks developed in response to chemical attacks. The horror of poison gas is still fresh in your mind, an invisible enemy creeping through the air, forcing soldiers to don uncomfortable masks that made breathing a chore. Yet, despite the horror, there were moments of unexpected humanity. You recall the famous Christmas truce, when soldiers from opposing sides emerged from their trenches, sharing food, stories, even a game of soccer under a fragile peace. The war is a paradox, brutal and senseless, yet filled with small, defiant acts of kindness and humor. You grin at the thought of a general's cat becoming the unit mascot, sneaking around the trenches and offering comfort. The sensory details pile up, the cold seep of mud, the stench of decay, the sharp crack of rifles, and the fleeting warmth of a shared cigarette. It's a world of contrasts, where life and death coexist in the tight space of a trench. You feel the weight of time again, days stretching endlessly, punctuated by the randomness of survival. The war drags on, relentless and exhausting, testing every limit. You leave the trenches, at least in your mind, and follow the soldiers into the rear lines, where things are slightly less deadly but strange in their own way. There, you encounter a complex web of logistics, working hard to keep millions of soldiers alive, fed, and, on lucky days, equipped with a love letter or two. Each step forward blurs the line between order and chaos. You see horse-drawn carts, and rickety trucks packed with hard bread, ammunition, medical supplies, and sometimes a mandolin case for anyone still optimistic enough to play. Science has a name for this: large-scale logistical systems, and you really can't underestimate it. Fuel, bullets, food, and water all had to reach the front lines, through mud, shell fire, and some very moody mules. And then there are the field hospitals. You step into a canvas-covered tent where army medics work almost non-stop. One scientific study later noted that frontline doctors often slept less than 4 hours a day during extended campaigns. They wrapped wounds with medicated cotton and hope, performed surgeries under the dim glow of oil lamps, and tried to pull someone back to life with just a bottle of morphine and a bit of optimism. Each bed held a story, a thin chance, and a letter that never got sent. There's a hard-to-believe story of a French nurse who learned to tell artillery types just by ear. She could distinguish German guns from Allied ones by sound alone. Odd. Absolutely. But it was a survival skill, like learning to sleep with one eye open or keeping your hardtack from becoming a blunt weapon. Historians still argue whether the rear lines were what allowed the war to drag on so long. Some claim it was the strength of the supply chains that let the fighting last until 1918. Others believe that resource exhaustion should be forced peace talks earlier. If only someone had admitted they were tired. You pass a ration depot and hear British troops joking about something called bully beef, canned meat, that was equal parts chewy and bland, perfect for building shelter or at least plugging bullet holes. Some even used it to wedge artillery shells into place. War breeds creativity in all the wrong ways. Then there's tin chicken. Mail. You see a soldier carefully folding a love letter with muddy fingers. Writing home became ritual, a thin lifeline to the outside world. Modern science shows that even one positive contact from a loved one can dramatically improve resilience under extreme stress. A note from mom, or a scribbled card from a kid's sister, could make a man smile in the middle of shell fire. You pass by a makeshift canvas cafe, where soldiers are handed weak coffee and a square of chocolate like it's a reward. It's not Starbucks, but it's enough to get you out of bed the next day. They play cards, trade jokes about their officers, and occasionally slap on mud masks, not for beauty, but to keep mosquitoes away. And don't forget music. A Scottish soldier blows into his bagpipes, making even a few Germans in the distance look up, either in awe or horror. Unclear. A study once found that music in wartime helps regulate heartbeat and reduce anxiety. And if you've ever heard a bagpipe band in a war zone, you'll know it can either save your soul or kill your nap. The world behind the front lines is half real, half dream, a survival hub and a momentary return to humanity. Traveling theater groups performed Shakespeare right next to ammo storage. Soldiers laughed in the dark, their laughter mingling with distant thunder. Bizarre, but also deeply human. You exhale and feel the contradiction sharply. The most dangerous place is also the only place you've seen tenderness. You press your boots into the waterlogged earth of the upper salient, and the moment they sink with that thick, squelchy resistance, you already know you're not getting them back without a fight. Trench foot is a daily gamble here, just one of many delightful souvenirs of the Western Front. The mud clings like it has a crush on you, and won't take no for an answer. Around you, duckboards stretch in drunken zigzags, half submerged by rain, shell fire, and something less mentionable. You trudge forward anyway, because what else is there to do? Welcome to Third Ypres, or Passchendaele, depending on how French or miserable you're feeling. It's 1917, and this battle isn't so much a clash as a mud wrestling match between entire armies. You see soldiers hauling themselves through chocolate pudding terrain, dragging equipment that weighs more than their will to live. Horses sink to their chests, some disappear entirely. And yes, that story you heard about a tank getting stuck and becoming a temporary bunker. Absolutely true. For 3 days, it served tea out of the loading hatch. The science of mud here is no joke. Soil saturation, combined with artillery churning the ground like a cake mixer, created what's technically known as a thixotropic slurry. Basically, it's quicksand with an attitude problem. One mainstream study from later geologists showed how the local clay absorbed moisture and refused to let it go, turning battlefields into boot-devouring horror films. But here's a fun one. Soldiers swore the mud had a smell, metallic, oily, tinged with decay. A weird fringe theory even claimed the soil released hallucinogenic gases. Scientists still argue whether the right combo of chemicals and rotting matter could trigger mild disorientation. Maybe that's why Private Hawkins tried to propose to a tree last Thursday. And while you're slogging through this swamp of despair, Someone had the brilliant idea to use mustard gas, because if drowning in sludge wasn't dramatic enough, why not add chemical burns and blisters the size of baseballs? You hold your breath through the yellow haze and remember the drill. Mask on in under 5 seconds or you'll be coughing up pieces of your lungs. And that's the polite version. You duck into a dugout carved from soggy chalk, where rats the size of raccoons are playing poker with someone's discarded rations. You try to rest, but artillery hums in the distance like a grumpy god clearing his throat. When the shelling begins again, the air pressure punches your eardrums like a nightclub bass line. You wonder, for a second, if you've actually gone deaf. And weirdly, it's kind of a relief. Some historians argue Passchendaele was a necessary push to break German lines. Others call it a complete waste of life in mud, mostly mud. Scientists still debate whether terrain management could have changed the outcome. Spoiler, when you're fighting in soup, maybe rethink the venue. As night falls, phosphorescent fungi glow faintly along the dugout walls. Bioluminescence, they say. Cold comfort, but strangely pretty. You watch them blink like sleepy fireflies as you lie back on your burlap sack, boots still soaked, skin itchy from lice, and the faint taste of gas in your mouth. You've survived another day. Probably, you're on a train now, but not the kind with snacks and quiet carriages. No, this one's rattling through northern France, packed with stretcher-bearers and groaning men, whose eyes look older than empires. You're in a medical evacuation train, part miracle, part nightmare. Inside, the air smells of antiseptic and singed fabric. Nurses move like ghosts through the narrow corridors, their faces pale under oil lamps swinging with each jolt. You hold the edge of your cot as the train lurches. There's a man across from you missing half a leg and all of his patience. He's telling jokes in French you don't understand, but his laughter is oddly contagious. You look out the window. Dark fields and moonlight blur past like silent witness. The contrast is absurd. Inside, carnage. Outside, peaceful farms and distant cows, pretending none of this is happening. Scientists still argue whether the trauma of the Western Front was worsened by this cognitive dissonance, how your brain tries to reconcile unspeakable violence with the quiet rhythms of normal life just miles away. One curious fact, by 1917, battlefield medicine had developed triage systems we still use today. Casualties were sorted into categories: helpful, if morbid, immediate care, delayed care, or not gonna make it. It made things efficient, but also robotic. You became a file in someone's chart. Tick the wrong box and you're shuffled to the back of the queue. Better hope your nurse had coffee. And yet, medicine advanced in leaps. Blood transfusions were becoming mobile. Portable X-ray machines, thanks Marie Curie, rolled into frontline hospitals. A mainstream study later proved survival rates increased notably with on-site surgical units. Small wins, even in hell. Meanwhile, a fringe theory suggests that morphine-laced chocolates were used to calm patients to panic for injections. Doesn't sound terrible, honestly. Probably beats trench tea. You drift off briefly, only to wake as the train screeches to a stop. They're unloading you now, too gently. That's never a good sign. You're carried to a tent lit in golden haze. Somewhere, a phonograph plays a waltz, like your pain has been invited to a dance. You try to smile. It might be the morphine. A nurse pats your shoulder. Her voice is soft and clipped. British. She tells you to rest. You close your eyes and listen to the steady hum of the canvas flaps in the wind. For a moment, you're not a soldier, just a human in a bed, dreaming of something warmer than war. You're in a field hospital now. It's mostly quiet, save for the creak of canvas, distant murmurs, and the occasional cough. You stare at the seams above you, tracing the lines like constellations. The pain's dulled to a distant pulse, just enough to remind you you're still here. The war's not over, but something has shifted. Rumors of armistice whisper through the wards like wind under a door. You listen closely, hoping, dreading. After all you've seen, hope feels suspicious. You overhear a doctor mutter something about Spanish flu. Scientists still argue whether the close quarters of trench life accelerated its spread. Whatever the cause, it's a new invisible enemy, one that doesn't wear a uniform. Just great. As if your immune system hasn't already checked out. A mainstream medical fact. The 1918 flu pandemic, would go on to kill more than the war itself. Talk about irony. But for now, in this moment, you're just focused on peeling a boiled potato with your non-dominant hand, because that's today's rehab. The nurse from earlier returns with a deck of cards. You play silently. She lets you win. You pretend not to notice. The sun cuts through the flap seam in a thin line of gold. You imagine walking out of here. Clean boots, dry clothes, something resembling a plan. The idea of peacetime feels as foreign as the trenches once did. Scientists still argue whether soldiers ever really came home, or just learned to wear a better mask. Someone's brought in a harmonica. A song you can't quite place floats over the beds like smoke. You let it wash over you, your eyelids growing heavier. And now, as the final notes of the harmonica drift away, the scene softens around you. The flickering lamps, the rustling canvas, even the quiet hum of distant thoughts. Everything begins to slow. You feel the weight of the blankets, the faint warmth of the cot beneath you, and a breeze that brushes your face like the whisper of a life waiting patiently outside the war. The images blur, trench lines dissolve into meadow paths, and the mud gives way to warm cobblestones. Boots are light. The air carries no cordite, only lavender. You breathe deeper, slower, steadier. The questions fade. No more. What happens next? Or, will I wake up to gunfire? Just the soft, steady rhythm of sleep pulling you toward its center, a place where time isn't measured by whistles and watches, but by breaths and dreams. You've walked far tonight, through wire and fog, through silence and storm. But here, finally, you get to stop, to rest, and somewhere beyond the edges of your sleep, the war pauses too, just long enough for you to drift fully into peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.